All right, to this story now. The South African Revenue Service has revealed that as of the 11th of October, it has received more than 1.2 million applications for tax directives for withdrawals from retirement fund members' saving components. Now, SARS says a gross amount of 21.4 billion has been paid out in savings benefit withdrawals. Joining us to discuss this further is SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter. Good evening, Commissioner. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Commissioner, if we weren't certain that South Africans desperately needed the additional funds, the 1.2 million applications have confirmed that they were in need of those funds. Just talk us through this process and how tax officials have been managing thus far.
Thank you. It was a real as well as the retirement funds. So just so that for the listeners, when an individual decides to make a withdrawal, he or she would apply to their funds. Their funds would then apply to SARS for a directive. The directive that is issued by SARS determines what is the tax that must be withheld from the individual, as it is quite commonly known and has been communicated that the amount that will be paid out will be subject to tax. So this is when we say that so far over 1.35 million directive applications have been requested. This is via the individuals or from the individuals via the funds. And of that, what we have also done on our part, we've asked individuals to make sure to allow for the process to not be held up. We've asked them to make sure that all their affairs are in order, that no outstanding issues with SARS, because if there is debt owing to SARS, SARS will also withhold the debt.
Now, we understand that, of course, 1.2 million have applied, 1.1 were approved. Now, of those applications that have been declined, what have you found to be the common issues with the applications?
The main reasons, so first of all, when an application is reached the funds would also do their own check. And the main reason for SARS withholding a directive would be generally related to an ID number validation failure, and 40% of the directives that have been declined relates to an inconsistency or an issue with ID number that cannot be matched. 23% of those validations, of those that have been declined, relates to failures of an invalid tax number. So mainly those two issues, and then also about 1 in every 5 of the directives that we've declined relates to more than one directive that have been applied for. So when there's a duplicate directive, then clearly SARS will only respond to one.
Now, we also understand that you've issued a warning for those who are apparently understating their taxable income. Just talk to us about this conduct that you've now noted.
So we've noticed two things. Firstly, either individuals declare that they have no income currently, which means that they do this so that they trigger a lower tax that is withheld. Now, clearly, SARS will pick that up, and this is, in fact, in law, strictly speaking, declaring an income which is lower or incorrect is, in fact, a false
evasion of tax.
And an individual is subject to penalties. And so we are saying to individuals, make sure that you don't declare an income that is incorrect, make sure that you don't make a mistake. Things eventually, when the filing season for the subsequent year is done, then any mismatch or anything that did not was not declared correctly will be eventually reconciled. An individual will either then sit with a huge penalty or with a huge tax bill, which will get them into further trouble.
And then, Commissioner, what of those who seek to cancel their tax withdrawal once they see that the amount to be deducted by SARS is quite high? Is this even permissible?
Well, they would then have to liaise with their pension funds, because remember, SARS does not pay out the money. SARS merely gives a directive to the pension fund that they must withhold certain amounts as an agent of SARS before they pay out the balance. So when an individual eventually receives the final amount that is paid out, and they then choose to cancel it, that would be a matter between them and the relevant fund. And all the funds will obviously have various ways of engaging with the individual, either online, or they would obviously have helplines and other ways of engaging. This would not be a matter between the individual and SARS.
And then, Commissioner, just in closing, the country is mourning, of course, the passing of the former Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni. And, of course, as Finance Minister, he would have worked closely with SARS. Can you share encounters with Mr. Mboweni that stand out for you?
I think what is remarkable about Tito Mboweni, firstly, he was a colorful individual, very unconventional. But beyond this, and often, this is what stands out. But behind this colorful and fiercely independent individual is someone who had committed his life as an activist and a fighter for democracy. And whether it was as a young Minister of Labour who spearheaded a remarkable transformation of our labour legislation coming from our very divided past to restore equity into the workplace. Already then, which was the first time I met him he was a young Minister of Labour, I was a young power plant manager for Eskom. And he came and he shared the thinking behind the new legislation. In his case, he used the labour law to further advance his fight for justice and for democracy, improving the material conditions of people. And so later on, when he moved into the governor's mansion and to the Reserve Bank, clearly he again saw this as an opportunity to contribute towards our democracy. I think it's important that we pause for a moment and reflect that during that 10 years under the leadership of President Mbeki, the Minister of Finance, then Emmanuel and Thabo Mbeki, and Tito Mboweni, we experienced the most stable decade economically in our history, in our 30-year history. Yeah. And it was under the sterling leadership of a clear and independent Reserve Bank that led monetary policy and a fiscal policy that sought to dig ourselves out of a technical and fiscal insolvency practically, and a revenue collection authority that was improving, that South Africa reached that really a high point, and one looks back and wishes that we can get back there so that our fiscal balance, our fiscal integrity can in fact be a sound basis for the important demands on fiscal resources for our government.
Commissioner, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's Edward Kieswetter, SARS Commissioner there, speaking to us.